Koreana's wrists burned from the coarse rope, each twist digging deeper until her skin felt raw beneath the fibers. Every step along the dusty frontier road stirred up clouds of grit that clung to her lips, mixed with the bitterness of betrayal. Her in-laws had done the unthinkable. In the silence of their cramped cabin that morning, they had handed her over like livestock, as if she were no more than a mule to be bartered. 2 crates of furs and a jug of whiskey, that was the price of her freedom, of her dignity, of her life. The man who now claimed her, the trapper, strode ahead with a lazy swagger, his broad back covered in a wolfskin coat that reeked of blood and musk. His rifle swung from his shoulder as if it were part of him, always within reach, always reminding her that there was no escape. His boots crunched the brittle grass, leaving imprints in the earth that Koreana was forced to follow, like footprints leading deeper into a nightmare. The landscape stretched wide and merciless around them, an endless sea of golden plains broken only by the jagged ridges of mesas standing like ancient sentinels against the horizon. The sky was enormous, a dome of blue that seemed almost cruel in its beauty. A hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the silence, and Koreana shivered. Out here, nothing was safe, least of all a woman alone with a man like the trapper. Her chest tightened with the memory of her husband's family, their faces hard, their words final. She had begged, tears slipping down her cheeks, but they had turned away. "It's better this way," her sister-in-law had muttered, though her eyes flickered with shame. Her brother-in-law wouldn't even meet her gaze. And her mother-in-law, with lips pressed into a thin line, had pushed Koreana toward the waiting trapper. The slam of the cabin door still echoed in her mind, final as a coffin lid. Now, every step she took seemed to pound that truth deeper into her bones. She had been sold? Sold by the very people who were supposed to protect her after her husband's death. Sold to a man whose reputation stretched across the frontier like a shadow. The trapper was known for his brutality, not just to the animals he skinned alive, for pelts, but to those unlucky enough to cross his path. "You'll learn to be quiet," he said suddenly over his shoulder, his voice gravelly, words rolling like stones in his throat. "You'll keep my fire going, mend my gear, and if you try running—" He let the sentence hang, turning his head just enough for her to see the smirk playing at his cracked lips. His hand tapped the stock of his rifle for emphasis. Koreana's throat tightened, but no words came. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing her plead. Her heart pounded fast, hot blood roaring in her ears, but her face remained stone. If he wanted to break her, he would have to try harder. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and red. Shadows stretched long across the grasslands, and the evening wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the sharp scent of dust and the faint tang of smoke. Koreana's gaze lifted toward the horizon, and there, faint against the dying light, she saw it. Movement. Shapes riding across the open land, small at first but growing, black silhouettes cutting against the fire of the sunset. Her breath caught. Riders. The trapper cursed under his breath when he noticed them. His stride quickened, his boots crunching harder against the earth, but his hand moved to steady the rifle across his back. His posture changed. Suddenly he wasn't swaggering. He was wary. Koreana saw his shoulders tense, his eyes narrowing. Beneath the brim of his battered hat, she squinted against the glare of the sun. There were several of them, but one stood taller in the saddle, his figure unshakable, framed by the crimson horizon. Even at this distance, something about him radiated authority. His hair, long and black, streamed behind him like a banner. The wind carried the faint beat of hooves to Koreana's ears. Steady as a drum. Her heart leapt, confusion mixing with a strange flicker of hope. Who were they? Outlaws? Another danger waiting to claim her? Or something else, something sent by fate itself, when her world had already been torn apart? The trapper spat into the dirt, tightening his grip on her rope. "Keep moving," he growled. But Koreana could feel it, the ground vibrating beneath her feet, the weight of change rolling closer with every thunder of hoofbeats. The horizon was no longer empty. It was watching, and someone was coming. The trapper's camp squatted at the edge of a dry riverbed, a place that stank of death and trade. Stretched pelts hung from crude frames, fluttering in the evening wind like ghostly banners, their fur matted with dried blood. Bones lay scattered. In the dirt ribs and skulls of wolves, foxes, and even bear, sun-bleached reminders of the man's cruelty. Smoke curled from a small fire pit, acrid and thick, stinging Koreana's eyes as she stumbled forward, the rope tugging at her wrists like a leash. The trapper shoved her hard, nearly sending her sprawling against a pile of hides. "Best get." "Used to it, girl," he muttered, his voice gravelly with the edge of a man who owned nothing but his hunger. "You'll cook, you'll mend, you'll clean, and you'll keep quiet." He grinned, flashing broken teeth stained with tobacco. "You're mine now." Koreana steadied herself, refusing to let him see her falter. Inside, fear coiled in her belly, but she forced her chin up, her eyes locking onto his with a silent defiance. If he expected her to break, he would wait a long time. She had already been betrayed, discarded, and sold like a worn-out horse. What more could he do to her soul? The trapper dropped the rope, confident she had nowhere to run, and stalked toward the fire. He poured whiskey from a dented tin flask, sloshing some down his beard before sinking onto a log. His rifle lay propped beside him, within easy reach. Koreana sat stiffly on the ground, her hands still bound, watching the horizon. The sun was a wound bleeding into the earth, shadows lengthening with each passing minute. The riders she had glimpsed earlier still burned in her memory, the silhouettes against the crimson sky, the way one figure had seemed larger than life, carved from fire and dusk. She blinked, straining her eyes. Was it a trick of desperation? Had she only imagined them? The trapper followed her gaze and snorted. "Don't be thinking about saviors, girl. Nobody's coming for you." He leaned back, pulling a strip of dried meat from his pocket and gnawing at it with yellowed teeth. "This land don't care if you scream. Ain't nobody out here but coyotes and me." But Koreana's heart quickened because she saw it. Again, movement on the rim of the plains. Dust rising, faint but undeniable. The low thrum of hooves drifted on the wind, steady and certain. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was coming. The trapper stiffened now, his drunken grin fading. He grabbed his rifle, squinting into the distance. His jaw tightened. "Damn Injuns," he spat. "Always skulking around where they ain't wanted." Koreana's pulse thundered. She leaned forward, straining against the ropes biting into her wrists. Shapes emerged, dark against the fading glow of sunset riders, their horses painted with bold streaks of color and feathers streaming from their manes. They moved as one, silent and purposeful, their presence commanding the very air around them. At their head rode a man who seemed to belong more to legend than flesh. He was shirtless, his skin bronze in the last fire of daylight, every muscle etched with strength and motion. His long black hair flowed behind him like a river, adorned with beads and feathers that caught the light. Around his neck and arms gleamed tribal jewelry, bone, silver, and carved stone, each piece alive with meaning. His eyes were fixed on the camp, sharp as a hawk's, unflinching, unyielding. Koreana's breath caught. The sight of him struck something deep inside her fear. Yes, but also something else. A stirring of hope, raw and dangerous. The trapper spat into the dirt, lifting his rifle to his shoulder. "She's mine!" He shouted into the wind, his voice carrying harsh and ugly across the plains. "Paid for her fair and square." The riders didn't slow. They spread out in a wide crescent, their horses moving with practiced precision, surrounding the camp in silence. The firelight flickered across their painted faces, across eyes that burned with something Koreana couldn't read. The leader dismounted with a fluid grace, his tall frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the trapper whole. Koreana's chest tightened, her bound hands trembling in her lap. She didn't understand what was happening, only that the air felt charged, alive with something vast. The trapper sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. The warrior stepped forward, and in a voice low but thunderous, he spoke the words that would change everything. "She is not yours." The trapper's fingers curled tighter around his rifle, knuckles white against the wooden stock. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the dry air, and the silence that followed the warrior's words felt heavier than iron chains. "She's mine." The trapper spat, his voice sharp with rage and fear. "I paid for her. She belongs to me." The words sliced through Koreana like a blade. Belongs. As if she were nothing but property, no more than a pelt or a jug of whiskey. Her bound hands trembled in her lap, but her eyes darted to the warrior, who stood like an unmovable wall of stone and flame. He didn't flinch. His bare chest gleamed in the firelight, muscles taut as if carved by the same earth beneath their feet. His long black hair shifted in the evening wind, beads and feathers whispering like spirits. Around him, the other warriors sat tall on their painted horses, watching, silent but sharp-eyed, their very presence making the air thrum with power. "You cannot buy a woman," the warrior said, his voice low and steady, carrying with it the weight of something older than the land itself. The trapper barked a laugh, though it came out thin and shaky. "Don't tell me what I can or can't do. This here is the white man's law, not yours." He jerked the barrel of the rifle toward Koreana. "She's mine, and you'd best turn around before you find yourselves skinned like the rest of the hides here." Koreana's pulse hammered in her throat. The circle of riders didn't move, but their horses shifted restlessly, snorting into the night air. The warrior's gaze never left the trapper. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, his shadow growing long across the firelit ground. The trapper licked his lips, sweat gleaming at his temples despite the cooling night. He wasn't used to being challenged. He thrived on fear, on weakness, and Koreana realized with a jolt he didn't know what to do with someone who wouldn't bow, stayed back. The trapper barked, lifting the rifle higher. His hands trembled, now just enough for Koreana to see it. "I'll shoot, I swear it." The warrior's dark eyes glinted, steady as the stars beginning to emerge overhead. His words came like rolling thunder. "Shoot then, but know this, if you do, you will not see another gone." For the first time, the trapper's bravado cracked. His eyes flicked around the circle of riders, then back to the warrior. He saw what Koreana saw, the certainty in their faces, the calm readiness of men who feared nothing. The warrior before him wasn't bluffing. Koreana's breath caught as the trapper snarled and shifted his aim, swinging the rifle toward the warrior's chest. The moment stretched, every heartbeat a drum in her ears. The fire hissed, a spark, rising and vanishing into the night. Then dash movement. The warrior surged forward with the speed of a striking hawk. His hand slammed against the barrel, jerking it skyward just as the gun roared. The crack shattered the silence, echoing across the plains. Birds exploded from the trees, their wings a flurry of panic against the darkening sky. Koreana flinched, her ears ringing. Smoke curled from the muzzle as the bullet whistled harmlessly into the stars. The trapper staggered, cursing, trying to wrench the rifle back, but the warrior was already inside his reach. With a twist of his arm and a sharp blow, he tore the weapon from the trapper's grasp and sent it spinning into the dirt. The trapper lunged with a growl, his fists heavy, wild with desperation. He swung hard, the blow glancing off the warrior's shoulder. Koreana gasped, watching the clash like a storm tearing across the earth. Dust rose beneath their boots as the two men collided, raw fury against calm strength. The trapper fought like a cornered animal, spitting curses, swinging again and again. But the warrior moved with precision, every strike measured, every motion born of discipline. He ducked beneath a wild punch and drove his fist into the trapper's gut, folding him like dry leather. The air whooshed from the man's lungs as he stumbled back, choking. Koreana's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She could smell the sharp tang of sweat, the acrid smoke of the fire, the metallic sting of fear hanging in the camp. The warrior straightened, his chest heaving, but his face, calm eyes still locked on his enemy. The trapper wheezed, clutching his stomach, spittle dripping from his mouth. "You can't take her," he rasped, voice broken now, more plea than threat. "She's mine." The warrior's answer came like a blade slicing through the night. "She belongs to no man." The words sent a shiver through Koreana, stronger than any strike or shout. The trapper's face twisted in rage, but in his eyes, for the first time, she saw it fear, and deep inside, hope sparked to life within her chest. The trapper staggered back, doubled over, his breath ragged as blood trickled from his split lip. The firelight painted him in shades of red and shadow, his figure trembling. No longer the swaggering brute who had dragged Koreana across the plains. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, glaring up at the warrior with eyes wide not with fury now, but with the cold edge of fear. Koreana's pulse hammered so hard she felt it in her temples. Her wrists throbbed where the rope dug into her skin, but she barely noticed. Every sense was locked on the warrior, who stood a few steps away, his chest heaving but his stance steady. The firelight danced over his bare shoulders, tracing the scars of battles past across his bronze skin. His long black hair swayed in the night breeze, beads and feathers catching the flicker of the flames. Glinting like small stars, he didn't gloat. He didn't sneer. He simply stood, calm as a stone carved from the earth, waiting for the trapper's next move. "You'll regret this," the trapper growled, spitting blood into the dirt. He staggered toward his fallen rifle, hand outstretched. But the circle of riders tightened, horses snorting, hooves stamping against the ground. One warrior shifted slightly, his bow raised just enough to glimmer in the firelight. The message was clear: "Try it, and you won't live another breath." The trapper froze, his hand hovering over the rifle. Slowly, his eyes darted around the camp, measuring the faces that stared back, silent, steady, unyielding. He was used to dealing with men he could intimidate, but these were not such men. These were warriors, bound together in something stronger than greed or fear. Koreana swallowed hard, her throat dry as the prairie dust. She felt the weight of what was unfolding, like the world itself was holding its breath. The warrior leader stepped closer, and for the first time Koreana could hear the soft creak of leather straps, the quiet jingle of ornaments tied to his chest. His shadow fell over the trapper, swallowing him in its size. When he spoke, his voice was low but firm, like distant thunder rolling across the plains. "She is not yours." The words sent a shiver through Koreana. They were more than a statement. They were a verdict. The trapper's jaw clenched, his pride buckling under the weight of defeat. "You don't get to say that," he rasped. "She ain't one of you. She's white. She don't belong with your kind." The warrior's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes, something fierce. He turned, and for the first time his gaze settled fully on Koreana. The intensity of it made her breath catch. In his eyes she saw no pity, no mockery, only recognition, respect. "She belongs to herself," he said, his words ringing out with the certainty of law. The trapper laughed, though it broke halfway into a cough. "You think you can just take her, that she follow you? She's nothing without The warrior cut him off, not with words, but with silence. A silence so heavy that it seemed to crush the trapper's last attempt at bravado. Around them, the other warriors murmured in their tongue, voices low, like the rustle of wind through tall grass. Koreana couldn't understand the words, but she felt the weight of them. The trapper, sensing the balance tipping beyond his control, stepped back. His shoulders sagged, his breath wheezing, but his eyes still burned with bitterness. He jabbed. A finger toward Koreana. She never survived without me. You'll see. She ain't strong enough. Koreana flinched, shame and anger colliding inside her. But before the doubt could take root, the warrior's voice cut through her thoughts. Strength is not yours to give her. It is already within her. The trapper's face twisted, but he said nothing. He knew he had lost. The circle of riders parted slightly, giving him just enough space to slink away into the darkness. He glanced back once, his eyes promising vengeance, then disappeared into the night, swallowed by the endless plains. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of the fire and the distant cry of a coyote. Koreana sat frozen, her heart pounding as if it might burst. She hardly knew whether to feel relief or fear. The trapper was gone, but what had she been delivered into? The warrior knelt before her, his movements slow, deliberate. With a small knife, he cut the ropes binding her wrists. The fibers fell away, leaving raw, angry marks on her skin. She rubbed them gently, blinking at the sudden release. "You are free now," he said, his voice softer but still carrying the weight of command. Koreana met his gaze, her lips parting but no words forming. Free? She didn't even know what that meant anymore. Yet something in his eyes, a steady flame, unwavering, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could learn. The silence after the trapper vanished into the dark was thin, brittle, as if even the night itself was unsure whether to breathe. Koreana's wrists throbbed with the raw sting of freedom, the rope burns red and angry. She held them close to her chest, staring at the warrior who had cut them loose. He hadn't spoken again, but his presence loomed over the camp like the steady hum of the earth itself. The circle of riders did not break. Their horses shifted, snorting clouds of mist into the cool night, their eyes glinting in the firelight. They trusted their leader's silence more than any command. Koreana felt it. This wasn't over. Not yet. Her fears proved right when the stillness shattered with a sudden snap of brush. A shadow moved at the edge of the firelight, then another. The trapper. He lunged out of the darkness, face twisted with hate, a knife gleaming in his hand. His rifle was gone, but desperation burned hotter than any bullet. With a roar, he charged straight at Koreana. She froze, breath trapped in her throat. The world narrowed to the glint of steel rushing toward her, the trapper's ragged snarl, cutting through the night. Her body screamed to move, but her limbs were heavy, her legs locked, and then the warrior moved. He sprang forward like a predator, bare feet pounding the dirt, muscles coiled and ready. In a blur, he slammed his arm against the trapper's wrist, the blade slicing air inches from Koreana's face. The knife spun from the man's hand, landing in the dust with a dull thud. The trapper cursed, swinging his fists, heavy and wild. The warrior met him head-on, each blow deflected with precision. Dust erupted under their boots, the fire casting frantic shadows across their struggle. Koreana's heart pounded as she watched. Every movement was survival, every strike carrying the weight of two lives. The trapper's fury made him reckless. He lunged again, spittle flying, his fists smashing into the warrior's ribs. The sound was sickening, and Koreana gasped. But the warrior didn't falter. He turned with the hit, using the momentum to drive his knee into the trapper's stomach. The man folded, wheezing, before a powerful fist caught him across the jaw. The crack echoed into the night. The trapper stumbled back. clutching his face, blood dripping between his fingers. He swayed, hatred blazing in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he bellowed, voice raw, broken. "Should drag you down with her." The warrior advanced slowly, step by step, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. The firelight wrapped around him, carving his frame into something larger than life. Shirtless, scarred, adorned with beads and feathers that whispered in the breeze. His long black hair whipped across his face, but his eyes never left the man before him. "You bring only death wherever you walk," he said, voice low but carrying. "No more." The trapper's gaze darted around, seeking escape. The circle of riders closed tighter, their painted horses stamping the ground, nostrils flaring. There was no way out. Desperation twisted his face, and with a roar, he charged again. This time the warrior didn't wait. He met him in the middle of the camp, the clash so fierce the earth itself seemed to shake. Koreana held her breath as the fight reached its peak, fists flying, dust rising, the night alive with grunts and the dull thud of flesh against flesh. The trapper fought like a madman, but the warrior was unyielding. Every strike he gave was deliberate, every move balanced between power and control. At last, the warrior's hand closed around the trapper's throat, driving him backward until his body slammed against one of the wooden frames holding stretched hides. The structure collapsed under the impact, pelts scattering into the dirt. The warrior pinned him there, eyes blazing, his voice cutting through the trapper's panicked gasps. "This ends now." With one final, decisive strike, the trapper crumpled into the dirt. His body lay twisted, chest heaving, blood streaking his face. He groaned, tried to rise, but the strength was gone. The firelight showed him for what he was: not a monster, not a master, just a broken man who had tried to own what was never his. The warrior stepped back, breathing heavy but steady, his eyes never leaving the defeated figure. The circle of riders watched in silence, their judgment heavy in the cool night air. Koreana sat frozen, her hands pressed against her chest. Relief surged through her, so fierce it nearly broke her. Tears she had buried for so long threatened to spill. She had lived, not because of chance, but because someone had stood between her and the darkness. The warrior turned toward her then, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes there was a promise unspoken. Yet as strong as stone, Koreana's world had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. The night held its breath. The trapper lunged with the speed of a rattlesnake, his knife flashing under the moonlight. Koreana gasped, stumbling backward, her bare feet scraping against the hard-packed dirt. For a heartbeat, it looked as though the blade would find its mark, until the warrior's hand shot out with lightning precision. He caught the trapper's wrist mid-strike. The sound was sharp, bone against sinew, a struggle born of pure rage against unshakable strength. The firelight glimmered off the warrior's bronzed skin, muscles straining as he twisted the knife hand downward. The trapper snarled, his teeth gritted, his face slick with sweat and blood. "You won't take her," the warrior said, his voice low and fierce, carrying the weight of mountains and storms. With one brutal twist, the knife clattered to the ground. The warrior's knee drove into the trapper's chest, sending him sprawling into the dirt, choking for breath. The world seemed to tremble in that moment, not with the chaos of battle, but with the silence of judgment. From the darkness beyond the fire, the mounted riders shifted, their horses stamping the earth. The steady rhythm of hooves sounded like drums of destiny. One by one, the warriors dismounted, their tall figures looming against the fire's glow. They formed a circle around the trapper and Koreana, silent as stone, their feathers in war. Paint flickering like shadows of spirits passed. The trapper's defiance faltered. His eyes darted, wild and desperate, searching for escape but finding none. His voice cracked as he shouted, She's mine. I paid for her, she belongs to me." The words hung in the night like a curse. The warrior standing over him did not move, but Koreana felt the shift in the air. Those words, so cold and cruel, carried no power here. The circle of riders answered with silence more damning than any blade. Koreana's breath shook as she stepped closer to the warrior's side. Her wrists burned from rope burns, her dress hung in tatters, but there was a new fire in her eyes. She had been sold, used, discarded like a possession. Yet, in this moment, surrounded by men who carried dignity like armor, she knew something the trapper never could. She was no man's property. The eldest of the riders finally stepped forward. His hair was streaked with gray, his chest broad and scarred from battles long past. Beads and eagle feathers adorned his shoulders, each one a mark of honor. His voice was deep, solemn, resonant. "This man," he said, pointing to the trapper writhing in the dirt, "trades flesh as if it were fur. He poisons the earth with greed. He does not belong here." The trapper spat, his voice breaking. "You can't do this. I'll tell the law this is murder." The elder's eyes narrowed, reflecting the firelight like steel. "Your law is not ours. Out here, justice is the earth's." The circle of riders tightened. The trapper's bravado cracked into begging. He dropped to his knees, hands shaking, eyes wide as he looked from face to face, searching for mercy. None came. The warrior who had fought for Koreana stood tall and silent, his chest rising and falling like the steady breath of a mountain. He had no need to speak. His actions had already judged the trapper. His protection had already chosen Koreana. Koreana clutched the edge of his arm, trembling, not out of fear but out of awe. This man, who had appeared from nowhere, who fought with strength but also with honor, had broken her chains in more ways than one. She felt her heart hammer against her ribs, the enormity of what was happening almost too much to bear. The trapper's pleas dissolved into curses, then curses into sobs. The circle of warriors moved closer, their shadows swallowing him whole. Koreana turned her face away, burying it against the warrior's shoulder, unwilling to watch. His arm wrapped around her instinctively, protective and unyielding, his hand resting lightly against her back as though to say, "You are safe now." The night cracked with the sound hoofs striking the earth, voices rising like thunder, the judgment of the tribe carried out. When silence returned, it was heavy and final. The fire popped, sparks flying into the cold night air. The circle of riders broke, some mounting their horses again, others standing tall in the darkness. The trapper was gone, erased from the earth like a shadow before dawn. Koreana lifted her face. The warrior's gaze met hers, dark and steady, filled with something she could not yet name. Gratitude surged through her, but so did something deeper, something terrifying in its intensity. She whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackle of flames. "Why me? Why did you come?" For the first time, his expression softened. He touched his chest with one hand, then pointed gently toward her. "Because," he said quietly, "the earth chose." The sun crested over the horizon, washing the world in a light so sharp it felt like a new beginning. The trapper lay bound in coarse rope, his curses swallowed by the silent judgment of the gathered riders. Dust hung in the air like a veil, broken only by the breath of the horses and the steady crackle of the dying campfire. Koreana stood behind the warrior, her torn dress streaked with dirt and ash, her heart still hammering in her chest. Every sound the jingle of a horse's bridle, the hiss of the wind over the grass pressed into her ears with unnerving clarity. The warrior stood tall before the gathered men, his silhouette cutting against the early sun. His long black hair caught the light like dark fire, cascading over his shoulders. The tribal jewelry at his neck and wrists shimmered faintly, each bead and feather telling stories Koreana could not yet understand. But what she did understand, deep in her bones, was the gravity of the moment. He had fought for her life not once, but twice, and now all eyes watched to see what would come of it. The oldest among the riders dismounted. His braids were gray, his movements deliberate, his face stern yet not unkind. The others bowed their heads slightly as he stepped forward, marking his authority. He studied Koreana for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to the warrior. "You risked more than your life tonight," he said in a low, steady voice. "You risked the peace of many." Koreana felt her throat tighten. The warrior gave no answer at first. His chest rose and fell, steady as a mountain, then he finally spoke. His voice carried like thunder rolling across open plains. "No peace stands when a woman is treated as cattle. No honor breathes where cruelty walks free. She is not his. She is not theirs. She is her own." The words struck Koreana like a blow. Her knees weakened, but she stood firm, her eyes fixed on him. Never before had anyone spoken for her with such clarity, such ferocity. Not her family, who had sold her away for coin and convenience. Not her husband's kin, who bartered her as though she were nothing more than trade goods. But this warrior, this stranger who owed her nothing, had placed himself between her and the abyss. The elder nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He turned his gaze to Koreana. "And you," he said, his voice softer but carrying the same weight, "do you wish to return to those who gave you away?" Her breath caught. She thought of the house she had left, of the faces that had smiled, as they sent her into darkness. The memory twisted like a knife. Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady when she answered, "No, I will never return to them." A murmur rippled through the gathered men, some surprised, others approving. The elder lifted his hand, and the camp fell silent again. His gaze lingered on Koreana, then shifted once more to the warrior. "Then you have chosen her fate," he said, "and so have you." The trapper writhed against his bonds, spitting curses and promises of vengeance. But his words carried no power now. The riders dragged him away, his voice dwindling into the distance until only the wind remained. Koreana stood trembling, her hands clasped before her. She expected the warrior to turn away, to walk back into his world and leave her standing in the ruins of her own. But instead, he turned toward her, his dark eyes softened now, though the power in them still blazed. "You are free," he said. The words fell into her chest like rain into parched earth. She wanted to believe them, but freedom was a concept she had never truly held. Her life had always been shaped by others, by family, by men, by circumstance. And now, with her heart hammering in her chest, she whispered, "And where does freedom go when the world feels so large?" The corner of his mouth curved slightly, the faintest hint of a smile. "It goes where you walk," he replied. Tears stung her eyes, but they were not born of sorrow. She looked to the horizon, golden and vast, stretching endlessly before her. For the first time, she did not see a trap but a path. The riders mounted their horses, some giving her nods of respect, others watching her with curiosity. The elder's voice rose one last time. "Then let her walk with us until she finds her place." The warrior extended his hand, not as a command, not as a claim, but as an offering. For a heartbeat, Koreana hesitated, then she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, steady as the earth beneath her feet. Together they turned toward the rising sun. Behind them, the trapper's shouts had faded into silence. Ahead of them stretched a horizon as wide as forever. And in that moment, Koreana felt something she had never known before: hope. The Old West was vast, unforgiving, and cruel. But it was also a land where one could carve a new destiny from the dust. And for the first time, Koreana believed she could.